Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Jai Krishna Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri
Guru Sri Radhe Guru Kananda Bhagwan ki
Jai.
Hare
So we
Krishna.
want to start with 52 because we just touched on it last week and we didn't get a chance to discuss, and some folks weren't here anyway, so it'd be a nice beginning.
So 52, right, Praveen?
52, yeah, that's where we begin.
Shri Bhagwan Vacham Sudardashmidam Rupam Dristevanasi Mama Deva Apayashya Rupasya Nityam Darshan Kankshinaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjun, this form of mine now you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form, which is so dear."
All right. In the 48th verse of this chapter, Lord Krishna concluded revealing his universal form and informed Arjuna that this form is not possible to be seen by so many pious activities, sacrifices, etc. Now here the word Sudurdarsham is used, indicating that Krishna's two-handed form is still more confidential. One may be able to see the universal form of Krishna by adding a little tinge of devotional service to various activities like penances, Vedic study, and philosophical speculation. It may be possible, but without a tinge of bhakti, one cannot see. That has clearly been explained. Still, beyond that universal form, the form of Krishna with two hands is still more difficult to see, even for demigods like Brahma and Lord Shiva.
They desired to see him, and we have evidence in the Srimad Bhagavatam that when he was supposed to be in the womb of his mother Devaki, all the demigods from heaven came to see the marvel of Krishna, and they offered nice prayers to the Lord, although he was not at that time visible to them. They waited to see him. A foolish person may deride him, thinking him an ordinary person, and may offer respect not to him, but to the impersonal something within him. But these are all nonsensical postures. Krishna, in his two-armed form, is actually desired to be seen by demigods like Brahma and Shiva.
Nimish Prabhu?
In Bhagavad Gita 9.11, it is also confirmed Avjanti imama muda manushyam tanam ashritam. He is not visible to the foolish persons who deride him. Krishna's body, as confirmed by Brahma Samhita and confirmed by Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita, is completely spiritual and full of bliss and eternality. His body is never like a material body, but for some who make a study of Krishna by reading Bhagavad Gita or similar Vedic scripture, Krishna is a problem.
Mother Prabhu?
For one using a material process, Krishna is considered to be a great historical personality and very learned philosopher. But He is an ordinary man, and even though he was so powerful, he had to accept a material body. Ultimately, they think that the absolute truth is impersonal. Therefore, they think that from his impersonal feature, he assumed a personal feature attached to material nature. This is a materialistic calculation of the Supreme Lord. Another calculation is speculative. Those who are in search of knowledge also speculate on Krishna and consider him to be less important than the universal form of the Supreme.
Savitaji?
Thus, some think that the universal form of Krishna, which was manifested to Arjuna, is more important than his personal form. According to them, the personal form of the Supreme is something imaginary. They believe that in the ultimate issue, the absolute truth is not a person, but the transcendental process is described in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4. To hear about Krishna from authorities, that is the actual Vedic process, and those who are actually in the Vedic line hear about Krishna from authority. And by repeated hearing about him, Krishna becomes dear.
Sonali?
As we have several times discussed, Krishna is covered by his yoga and Maya potency, Yogmaya potency. He is not to be seen or revealed to anyone and everyone. Only by one to whom he reveals himself can he be seen. This is confirmed in the Vedic literature. For one who is surrendered, who is a surrendered soul, the absolute truth can actually be understood. The transcendentalist, by continuous Krishna consciousness and by devotional service to Krishna, can have his spiritual eyes opened and can see Krishna by revelation.
Bill? Bill, Prabhu?
Abel or Bill?
Bill.
Bill, okay.
Bill, you there?
Okay, yeah. Such a revelation is not possible even for the demigods. So therefore, it is difficult even for the demigods to understand Krishna, and the advanced demigods are always in hope of seeing Krishna in his two-handed form. The conclusion is that although to see the universal form of Krishna is very, very difficult and not possible for anyone and everyone, it is still more difficult to understand his personal form, his Shyama Sundara.
Okay. What a purport here, and what a verse. One of these verses of the Bhagavad Gita that's very definitive, and it's going to lead us into the, well, 53 is not such an important verse, but 54 and 55 of this chapter are very, very definitive verses. So I'll ask everybody first if you have any questions or comments or thoughts before we I'd like to actually go through this purport and pick out certain things that are very important here, one by one. But if there's any questions or comments to begin with, let's start with those.
Well, here's something. What exactly does Prabhupada mean by seeing Krishna? I mean, what's this the nature of, I mean, I've had visionary experiences, but I'm not sure that what I've had is what he's talking about, because we can't, wait around for an incarnation to happen, because it's like, that's kind of rare. But something that's personally accessible to a devotee. What format is he talking about?
when we talk about what Prabhupada's speaking about seeing Krishna, this is a process for advanced devotees, ultimately, where they actually meet Krishna face to face in a real setting in the spiritual world. So we'll take someone like Srila Prabhupada, for example, and I'm going to bring this into something that's practical for us also. Srila Prabhupada actually was able to exist on two planes. One is the Srila Prabhupada we saw here in this planet, engaging with us, speaking to us, being with us, teaching us. And the other was his spiritual, what's called Siddhadeha, his eternal form in relationship with Krishna, in which he was actually seeing Krishna very directly. So that's a very advanced devotee called an Uttama Adhikari devotee who sees Krishna directly. Now, when we are on a lower level of Krishna consciousness than that, then when we're studying Krishna consciousness under the direction of a person like Srila Prabhupada, who's very advanced, he gives us the tools and the process by which Krishna gradually becomes revealed. And so there are two areas in Kali Yuga where Krishna reveals himself. One is, and it's universal, it's Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalona Steva, and Steva, and Steva, and Steva, and Gacharnita. And it's only by chant, there's no other way except chanting Hare Krishna to become realized. If we perfect our chanting, we actually will have darshan of Krishna through the holy name. And how that darshan comes, it may come in ways that cannot be perfectly explained to us in a materialistic sort of way, through words. It will be a revelation. And there's a word called a spurti, which means like a divine vision. There's another way Krishna is seen by the devotee, and it's really important for us. And it's through the deity form. It's through the deity form. Now, the deity form of Krishna, it's been stated by one of our current teachers. He says, well, actually, the deity stands there in one place so you can actually see him. In other words, it may appear to the mundane eye that the deity is a statue, but actually may appear to be a statue. But actually, the deity of the Lord, like you see here in our temple, is truly actually Krishna. And the pure devotee can see that directly. Now, the less advanced devotees who are not so pure can have gradual understanding of Krishna in that deity form as they progress in Krishna consciousness by chanting and following the instructions of their guru. Remember, everything ultimately depends on our getting instruction from guru. So Krishna consciousness is a very practical system of gradual revelation of Krishna's form from the very beginning, where it's very simple. That one is, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I'm the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon, some very simple revelations through hearing the holy name in our japa, which reveals Krishna's nature and form to us, ultimately, to seeing the deity form of the Lord. And then finally, when we're actually at a perfected stage, like someone like Srila Prabhupada, we're actually in Goloka Vrindavan with Krishna, even before we leave the body in this life. We may not get there in this life, but it's a process of going there slowly but surely.
So when we go to a temple and we see the deity, for example, here in New Goloka, the deity form of Krishna, Radha and Krishna, they have been installed. In other words, they have come by being requested to come and be present in those deity forms, in those statues. Not that any statue that we see of when Radha Krishna is necessarily installed, but we're talking about the real presence of the Supreme Lord that has been installed by certain kind of rituals and certain kinds of procedures where Krishna, Radha and Krishna agree to be present in that deity form. So we have material eyes, so we see the statue, but the person who has transcendental vision, that person can actually see the form of the Supreme Lord in person.
Good question, Bill.
Yeah.
Important question, and something that we can all work towards in the process.
Yeah,
Any
the
other
pran pratishtha, right? That the process is called the pran pratishtha.
Pran
Right.
Pratishtha? Yeah,
There is. Yeah.
call it the deity, yeah, bring the deity into the form. Okay, so any other questions, or because I'd like to touch base on each paragraph here on a couple points in each one. But no, if someone's got another question, we can entertain that. Any other questions, comments? So in the first paragraph, Prabhupada begins by making a very clear point here. He says, now here the word Sudurdarsham is used, indicating that Krishna's two-handed form is still more confidential. One may be able to see the universal form of Krishna by adding a little tinge of devotional service to various activities like penances, Vedic study, philosophical speculation. But without a tinge of bhakti, it may be possible, but without a tinge of bhakti, one cannot see. So there are a lot of people, yogis and persons who are on a spiritual path who get sort of what we call visions of divinity, spiritual visions that may be somewhat similar even to a universal form, some sort of vision of a divine purpose or divine, some sort of, we hear about mystics, different religious systems that see these things, divine manifestations. These are only very, very minor manifestations compared to Krishna's two-handed form. These are very, as Prabhupada farther down says, that it's the forms of the Vishnu forms which are the closest to his form, and those are much higher than these other forms that appear in the world. So these forms may be visible to somebody who is not on the Vedic, in the form of doing bhakti yoga. They may be able to get some vision, but they can only get a little vision if they have some bhakti. So what's being made here is a very important point, is that we are very fortunate to be on the path of Krishna consciousness, where we can have a vision of Krishna's two-handed form, ultimately, because it is the most confidential form. And these other forms, which may be important to other people in other times, they are very much less important. They're glimpses, but they're not the true technicolor vision of the Supreme Lord. It basically says here that even the demigods like Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, they're very much eager to see Krishna's two-handed form. And there's many stories about how they misunderstand Krishna at times, even though they're very highly placed demigods. Like Lord Brahma, he had the whole mistake of thinking Krishna in Vrindavan, he mistook who he was and played a game and took the cows and cowherd boys, and Krishna fooled him by playing a trick back on him. But we won't get into all that. Let's see. Then farther down in this paragraph, it says here that a foolish person may deride him, thinking him an ordinary person, and may offer respect not to him, but something impersonal within him. Now, this is, I mentioned, there was a politician in India who wrote a Bhagavad Gita in which he talked about we don't surrender to Krishna, but to the unborn within Krishna, which is a misunderstanding of Krishna's body. Krishna's body is not material. Krishna's body is purely spiritual. And therefore, it cannot be compared to a material body. And if we do that, then we fall into what can be called Mayavad philosophy, which states that except for the Supreme Brahman, everybody you see in this world is a material body, including Krishna, which is incorrect. You want to talk about 9/11?
Yeah, in verse 9:11 of the Bhagavad Gita,
The beginning of the next
which
paragraph.
which is the beginning of the next paragraph, it's been explained. If we can go to verse 9:11, that would be very nice. Let me find it. Vachananti mamudha. Yes, right. Vachananti mamudha manushim tanam ashritam param bhavam ashananto mama bhavita.
Mama Bhuta.
Mama Bhuta Maheshwara. Let me put my glasses on here. Okay. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that being. So if we go through the Bhagavad Gita, we realize that Krishna is constantly saying who he is. Constantly, so many verses. This is one of them. So fools deride me when I descend in the human form because they think that the human form is simply a material form, like Krishna was just talking about, not understanding that he is coming in his own transcendental form, and people who don't have spiritual intelligence, they mistake him and thinking that he is material, that maybe a hero or a prince or something, but a human after all. And they do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord or all that being. That's very important. He's declaring who he is right there in this verse.
Second paragraph. Any questions or thoughts about that? There's a couple places where Johnny kind of started off here. Ultimately, they think that the absolute truth is impersonal. Therefore, they think that his form is, that his impersonal feature, that from his impersonal feature, he assumed a personal feature attached to material nature. They think that somehow or other, born of this impersonal feature comes the body of Krishna.
And it's also a very common assumption to think that all these forms of the divinity, for example, Narayan or Vishnu or Krishna, any of these forms is a temporary manifestation of the impersonal oneness. Mm-hmm. Not understanding that impersonal oneness is the manifestation of the Supreme Lord and in all his forms. In other words, we have the Supreme Lord, we have the Lord, the Supreme Lord in the heart, the Paramatma, and then the glaring effulgence or the energy, the divine energy that pervades everything. But those two forms, Paramatma and the Brahmajyoti, are emanations from the Supreme Lord. The source is Krishna himself. And we know that Anadir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. He's the source of everything. And he is not caused by anything. And he is unlimited and has no beginning. And he is the cause of everything. So that explains. So reading the Brahma Samhita is also very, very enriching.
There's a section here also. It begins with this sentence. Those who are in search of knowledge also speculate on Krishna and consider him to be less important than the universal form of the Supreme. Thus, some think that the universal form of Krishna, which was manifested to Arjuna, is more important than his personal form. So they think that the form of the Supreme is imagination, and that the supreme truth isn't a person. This is their speculation. This is because they're trying to understand God through their own limited power of knowledge. But then Prabhupada says this, but the transcendental process is described in Bhagavad Gita. Now, this means that if we're going to understand Krishna, we have to understand Krishna as he is. Now, Prabhupada, he gave the name of his Bhagavad Gita as it is, because you can speculate. I think God's this, God's that, or whatever. But really, the answer is right in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada says we have to turn to chapter 4. And in chapter 4, actually, and I'm just going to summarize here, in the beginning of chapter 4, Krishna talks about what's called the parampara system, which is the disciplic succession, which Prabhupada says here, we need to hear about Krishna from authorities. In other words, we have to hear about Krishna from those who are actually in the Vedic line, who can give us the knowledge of Krishna. And by repeatedly hearing from people who are in this Vedic line, coming from Krishna and hearing about him, Krishna will become dear to us. It'll be revealed to us who Krishna is.
These persons we can trust because they're self-realized individuals who have actually attained the highest level of perfection.
And that's what Prabhupada is giving us, because he comes in this line. And otherwise Krishna is covered by, what is it said, yoga maya potency, and he can't be understood. Only one, Prabhupada says, only by one to whom he reveals himself can he be seen. So when Prabhupada sees Krishna, he's in the middle of the night, he's writing, he's translating, he sees Krishna, he talks to Krishna, then he writes down his realizations, then we read his realizations, then we can imbibe those realizations by hearing those through his words.
And the idea is that, but the more we hear about Krishna, the more we hear about his activities, his pastimes, his interactions, his qualities, the more we develop this dormant love, which is in the heart and ready to come out and eventually burst.
And then Prabhupada says, it's such a great purport. The transcendentalist, by continuous Krishna consciousness and by devotional service to Krishna, can have his spiritual eyes opened and can see Krishna by revelation.
And it's interesting because Prabhupada is fighting against a personalistic view of the Bhagavad Gita, which is quite what, or was, and I suppose still is quite widespread in India by those who are studying the Bhagavad Gita, pointing at every moment, with every word and every syllable and every sentence, Krishna is the supreme. Just listen to what Krishna is saying about himself, and accept what Krishna is saying about himself. There are so many texts of the Vedas, but we've mentioned this before, but the Bhagavad Gita is accepted by everyone. But what is it that Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita? He is declaring who he is. And Prabhupada tirelessly was working to make this point very clear against the tide of impersonalism that is just disavowing this idea that Krishna himself is expressing about his nature and his personality.
So we've talked a lot. Let me ask one question before we end here. Two questions. One, does anybody have a comment or question? And then I'm going to ask one question.
Sorry, we talked too much. So I apologize.
No, this purport really engenders this. Going back to Bill's original question. No, that moment. Going back to Bill's original question, and then I'm asking everybody a question here. And I gave an answer that Krishna can be seen through his deity form. Like, you come to the temple here in Hillsborough, and you see Radha Golokananda. And, if you chemically analyze what they're made of, it's marble. So the question here is, if Krishna is transcendental and does not have a material body, how is he in the deity form? And how is it possible that actually he can manifest himself in the deity form? We kind of gave a hint on in it before, but does anybody have another insight into that?
It's the Archana form, right? So
Archana form.
It's by Pran Pratishtha, he expands himself.
He does expand himself, and he's been invited there by a pure devotee to expand himself in a form that we can see. And we could say it's material, right? But like Prabhupada gave the example that the expert electrician can use electricity to both run a heater and run a refrigerator. So Krishna's energy can be manifested in many ways, and therefore he can manifest himself through what appears to be material elements by his potency. And therefore the deity form is there to be visible to people who've got material eyeballs, which is us. Since we don't have spiritual eyes, he comes and says, I'll come in a form which your material eyes can see. And then also we can serve.
And a form that we can serve, exactly.
So that's the wonder of the deity.
Essentially, we're stuck in a grand illusion. And to become free of the grand illusion, we have to actually use our predicament. We have to use our illusion, because that's all we have to work with.
Yes.
And so if we can use the illusion to remind us of how to get beyond, then that's the highest use of our material senses. But at the same time, as long as we're reaching to an external to satisfy us, we're going to come up short, because what we're really dealing with is something that extends within us. It's always enough, but it's we need reminders of that internality of it by engaging our external senses, yes, our relationships.
It is an internal process of development, that's for sure.
And we can talk philosophically for thousands and thousands of years, millions, zillions of years, but we have to be practical and we have to practice the process. And the process is to hear from the Vedas, from the spiritual scriptures, to hear from the realized devotees, to do the practice ourselves by chanting the holy name and invoking his presence. So it's not so much a matter of intellectualizing, that will not work, never will work, but we can experience by chanting the holy name, there's a special taste that comes into our consciousness because our consciousness becoming purified. And with purified consciousness, the vision becomes more accessible. It's like somebody who goes into a room wearing glasses that are completely filthy. And the person says, I don't see anybody in this room. Well, start cleaning the glasses and then he will see. This is what's happening with us. It's called the chitta, the consciousness that is so contaminated that unless we purify, how do we purify? By following this process of hearing and chanting and serving, we will never be able to realize anything. So we have to be practical and practice.
Two last notes. The Vedas talk about you have to sometimes remove a thorn with another thorn. And then Prabhupada also said that sometimes a person becomes sick by eating milk. And therefore the cure, though, is another milk product, yogurt. So sometimes we must use what we have in this material world as the means to get ourselves out of the material world. And that's called yukta vairagya, or practical renunciation of the objects of this world to be used in spiritual development. So we should go to the next verse. Otherwise we'll be stuck.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, I have a question.
Yes.
So forget about the materialistic, those who have no vision of any intention of considering metaphysics or maybe spirituality. So even those who practice, like we talk about Mayavadis or impersonalists, those who are believe in Brahman, things like that, but not personality. My question is, even for those people, do they believe that Bhagavad Gita spoken? That's my question.
Well,
do they believe that it was spoken or not?
Yeah, well, I can't speak for everybody. but in general, everybody in India holds Bhagavad Gita as a sacred text. And most everybody, even if they're Mayavadis, will say that, oh, Krishna spoke it. Now, do they think Krishna is the Supreme Lord? They don't. Now, some, though, like you were talking about Mayavadi, or not Mayavadis, impersonalists who aren't Mayavadis, they would be like the four Kumaras. There are some Brahmavadis who have an understanding that somehow or other they're well, maybe it's been, anyway, I think maybe Gajendra is not here right. What? Oh, there it is. So the idea ultimately is I think that unless one is really a speculator and says, well, Krishna never existed and the Pandavas never existed, and then they may say that, well, it was all made up. But most spiritualists will agree that Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita. Many won't say he's God, the Supreme Lord, but that's why we have to hear from those persons.
But my next question is, those who say Krishna spoke, but if that is the case, then very straightforward, Krishna says he has personality. Then where is the speculation then? You say Krishna spoke. If they accept that Gita was spoken by Krishna, then why not when he says that all these various details, why not?
Well, Prabhupada said this. He said that people want to make a living on Krishna's words. And then he said something very funny. He said, do you think that Krishna spoke in such a way that wasn't understandable, that he left himself to be interpreted by some speculator in order to understand what he said? Or do you just understand what he said? So the speculators, they twist out a meaning and they invent a meaning as if to say, Krishna wasn't clear, so I'll have to clarify what he said. And Prabhupada said, well, why would you say that God wasn't clear to begin with when he said what he said and just accept directly what he said, other than saying, well, he really meant this. Well, Krishna is not leaving it for somebody else to explain who he is and what he does. He said it himself.
And people oppose the idea that Krishna is the Supreme Personality because of envy. There's a natural tendency not to want to accept any kind of authority and not to accept that anybody could be superior to me. So that also comes into place, and it corrupts the message that's being in their minds, the message that Krishna has given. They twist it completely just to fill their purposes.
Those are great questions, and they're really important questions. And I think we've just come to the point where we're not going to go to another verse.
Actually, we could read 53. It's very short.
Okay, Gajendra, let's read 53 in the purport.
It's very short.
It's short, and we may not have time to comment, but we can at least read that.
We should, because we can begin with 50.
And then we can begin with 54 the next time.
Which is fundamental. Is Gajendra there?
Gajendra? Yeah, he's going to read it.
Oh, are you not able to hear me?
I couldn't hear you.
No.
Now we can hear you.
I know we can hear
Oh, okay. I had some internet issues. All right. Naham vedena tapsana danena na chijya sakya evam vidho drustum drishtavanasi mam yatha. The form you are seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. Yeah. Deval?
Krishna first appeared before his parents Devaki and Vasudev in a four-handed form, and then he transformed himself into the two-handed form. This mystery is very difficult to understand for those who are atheists or who are devoid of devotional service. For scholars who have simply studied for scholars who have simply studied Vedic literature by way of grammatical knowledge or mere academic qualification, Krishna is not possible to understand.
Sejal Malay.
Nor is he to be understood by persons who officially go to the temple to offer worship. They make their visit, but they cannot understand Krishna as he is. Krishna can be understood only through the path of devotional service, as explained by Krishna himself in the next verse.
So the next verse is really important. And I just want to state there's three things here. It says, Krishna can't be understood. First off, it's obvious. The atheist can't get it. Because if they're an atheist, Krishna will not allow them to understand anything. But then there's another class that can't understand him. Scholars. They may be pious. They may be even try to believe in God in principle, that there's a God. But because they don't want to understand Krishna on Krishna's terms, as he explains himself, then they can't understand. Then the next group is pious people who go to church or temple. They're nice people. They follow the rules and laws, and they don't hurt people, and they give in charity, but they're really not too interested in anything other than just having a good life on earth and making sure that God might be able to help them out enjoying. They can't understand Krishna either. So these three classes, an atheist, a speculator, or just a materialistic, a traditionally, kind of a pious materialist, they can't understand. Krishna can only be understood by the path of devotional service, which is taught by a guru in a line of disciplic succession, and he gives a certain process, which in this age involves chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hearing Krishna Katha, associating with devotees, going to kirtans, and getting immersed, just bathed in Krishna's energies. So that's the process in this age. So we have to stop. Next week, it's an in-person program at Manish.
Yes, you all are invited to our home.
Very extremely important verse, fundamental verse, super excellent.
But we may not even want to do the verse because
Why?
It's going to be Bhaktivinoda Thakur's disappearance day. We can do kirtan and bhajan. We can anyway. We can. Well, we have a choice, but anyway, it's an auspicious day. Really auspicious day to have start our meetings up again.
Yes,
on Bhaktivinoda Thakur's disappearance day. It's also Gadadhar Pandit's disappearance day.
That's amazing day.
So it's a very, very you picked a good day to start the programs again.
Yeah.
Oh, it might be mine too.
I hope it's not your disappearance day. You won't be able to come to the program. Just hang in us one more week, Bill. Okay, enough of that.
Right, so we'll just see 3 minutes video from Amsterdam.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay.
Haribo.
Você vai do
Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
I did that with the Hare Krishnas in Amsterdam in 2000.
Oh,
So I was
great.
at that festival 21
yeah.
years ago. No,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
21.
That's nice.
Wow.
Well,
It was great.
whenever this picture happened, it has to be pre-COVID because I don't see a mask anywhere.
Actually, it mentions this year, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
In fact, there's one from April this year in UK without any mask.
Oh, really? Well, anyway, it looked pretty cold there too, so it must have been some months ago. But
January, it said in January sometimes.
maybe January 20, just before the. Anyway, I
Yeah,
can't
we don't
imagine. It's like when you see videos of street scenes and there's no one staring at a cell phone, you know it's pre-2008.
It actually says May 21. No, the London is May
Okay.
21. Anyways, yeah.
You want to show a London one?
Yeah, you want to see that? Okay. Let me bring it up.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Show the London one. That'd be great. It's always one of the highlights of seeing these great kirtans.
Stay with us, Jack. Change there. Oh, man. Yeah, no. Even though we came up, right, yeah, there.
All right.
That was pretty wild, Gajendraji. Anyways, nice.
May 21st.
Thanks so much for everybody's association. And
Thank
it's nice
you.
to see everybody. And we'll see you all in person next week, hopefully.
It'll be great.
And
Hare Krishna.
have a great weekend, great 4th of July.
Manish Prabhu,
Level-
put your address on that group.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will put there.
We'll get the notices out just like the old days, and we'll set things up. And hey, we'll have a nice big kirtan at your house.
Haribol.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
for hosting.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you so much.
Hare
Jai.
Krishna.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai.
All glories to
Gaur
Srila
Haribol.
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 Haribol.